Okay, let's unpack this. You've done all the reading, you've wrestled with these, really complex theories, you've gathered dozens of articles, and the research is solid.
It is. You know your subject inside and out.
Completely. You even have that beautiful predictive thesis statement just sitting there in your outline, waiting. But then you sit down to write the actual paper, and suddenly all those brilliant ideas feel like a pile of disconnected Lego bricks.
Hmm.
You're ready to build a masterpiece, but you can't figure out which piece goes first, or even how to make the structure whole.
It's the ultimate writing paradox, isn't it? Where, all that preparedness leads to a kind of paralysis. You've moved past the anxiety of what to say, only to hit this really deep, frustrating anxiety of how to assemble it.
Right.
We see this with experienced writers, for sure, but it's especially acute for learners, like Maya, the first-year student we were talking about. Her notes on the cognitive advantages of bilingual education they were genuinely insightful.
Yeah, the raw material was there.
Totally. But her rough drafts were they were structural non-starters. She had great data, but she couldn't write that first compelling line of the introduction, and her transitions between key concepts were jarring, to say the least.
Maya is essentially our listener today. She's not looking for a remedial lesson on, what is a paragraph. She needs the advanced blueprint.
The strategic framework.
Exactly, the framework that transforms these comprehensive notes into a single, flowing, persuasive argument. And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive, to give you a clear, tactical framework for assembling that research paper quickly and thoroughly, moving past that frustration of the blank page.
We're taking a deep dive into the underlying logic of the academic paper. And we're going beyond that simple requirement of introduction, body, conclusion.
Way beyond that.
We're focusing on the rhetorical flow that connects them, because once you master the structural movement, the precise intellectual sequence you lead your reader through, you don't just write a good paper. You write a clear, coherent, and, a highly effective argument.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The introduction. This section it's deceptively small, but it carries the entire weight of the paper's success. It has to do all this heavy lifting of establishing credibility and setting the stage for the analysis that follows.
It does, and our sources are really emphatic about this. The introduction is a rhetorical funnel.
A funnel, I like that.
It is, and it has 4 non-negotiable jobs that have to be executed in a very specific sequence. You can't just mix and match them.
And that concept of the rhetorical funnel is so critical, isn't it? Because you can't just dump facts.
Yeah.
You have to guide the reader's attention from this, vast universe of your topic.
Down to the pinprick focus of your specific argument.
Yes.
And the structure achieves this by mandates. Job 1 is to grab the reader's attention, the hook.
Job 1, the hook.
Job 2 is providing the necessary background information and context. Then, Job 3 requires you to present the specific research question or the objective. And finally, Job 4 is the absolute intellectual closure of the whole segment, the thesis statement.
All right, let's drill down into that first job then. Crafting a powerful hook. I think a lot of writers struggle here because they confuse an attention grabber with the topic itself.
Oh, absolutely.
They start straight away with dense academic jargon or a meta discussion of the literature, and you just lose the reader before they even invest.
You do. And the sources outline 4 extremely effective techniques here. The choice you make really depends on the nature of your research.
What are they?
Okay, so you can use a surprising fact, a short narrative scenario or an anecdote, a meaningful and verifiable statistic, or a provocative question. The goal is always immediacy. You have to anchor the topic in reality or intellectual relevance, instantly.
I find this statistic is one of the most intellectually compelling hooks, especially in fields like, say, social science or empirical research. It just immediately injects verifiable reality into the discussion.
It does. Let's use the example from our source material. Over 60% of university students report high levels of stress during exam periods.
That's powerful.
It's so powerful because it establishes scope and relatability. It moves the conversation from this abstract academic idea of stress to a concrete, quantified reality that's affecting, the listener or the reader's own peers.
Yeah.
When a reader encounters a strong, validated statistic like that, their internal question shifts from, so what are you talking about? To, okay, why is this happening and what can be done about it? You've instantly bought their intellectual investment.
But what if your research is more theoretical? or, focused on interpretation, like Maya's work on bilingual education,
Yeah.
a statistic might feel really forced there.
It would. It wouldn't fit. And in those interpretive fields, a short, vivid scenario or a brief, relevant historical anecdote works beautifully.
So for Maya, what would that look like?
Well, for Maya, instead of a statistic, she can open with a short, compelling image. Something like, the child switches seamlessly between Spanish and English mid-sentence, a fluid linguistic dance that once marked confusion, but which researchers now recognize as a sign of enhanced cognitive flexibility.
Oh, that's good. It paints a picture.
It does. That scenario, as long as you keep it brief and focused, it primes the reader for the theoretical discussion that's coming. It makes the abstract idea immediately human.
So that demonstrates the strategy, right? The hook is the anchor. And once that anchor is set, you move straight into the contextual work jobs 2 and 3. Context and the research question.
Yes, these are the steps where you really execute the funnel, transitioning the reader from that broad, attention-grabbing idea toward your hyper-specific area of focus.
So Job 2, providing background information, how is this different from just, a literature review dump?
It's a bridge, a strategic bridge. And it's essential for achieving what we call literature positioning. You aren't just summarizing the field, you're strategically placing your paper within the ongoing scholarly dialogue.
Okay, so with our stress example, what would that context be?
It would be something like, stress affects academic performance, sleep patterns, and overall well-being. Researchers have explored many strategies to reduce stress among students, from mindfulness practice to dietary interventions, but consensus on the most effective physical intervention remains elusive.
That last sentence is key, isn't it?
It's everything.
It shows the reader what's been done, but more importantly, it subtly creates a gap. It shows where the field currently stands, which makes space for your contribution. You're signaling that you've done the literature review, and you know precisely where the knowledge is currently insufficient.
Precisely. You guide the reader, saying, here is the general field, here is why it matters, and crucially, here is the problem, or the missing piece of the puzzle. And that missing piece leads us directly to Job 3.
Stating the specific research question or objective, this is the paper's contract with the reader.
It is the contract.
So why is it so crucial to state the question explicitly? Why not just let the reader kind of infer it from the context? I mean, doesn't the thesis handle that?
The question handles expectations with surgical precision. If you don't explicitly state the question, the reader can't accurately measure the success of your conclusion. It manages the scope.
Okay, so give me the example.
For our stress paper, the research question is clearly, this paper investigates how regular physical exercise influences stress levels in university students. Simple. Direct.
And for Maya's work on bilingualism.
Hers might be more interpretive. Something like, to what extent does early bilingual exposure translate into superior executive functioning skills later in academic life?
It tells the reader exactly what intellectual terrain you're covering. It's the moment the broad topic becomes a contained scholarly investigation.
And that focused research question, which narrows the intellectual scope, leads us to the rhetorical closure of the introduction. The thesis statement's final placement.
Job 4.
Job 4. And this is the golden rule of academic structure. I mean, it bears repeating because of its rhetorical function. The thesis statement must always be the final sentence of the introduction. Always. It provides the intellectual climax of the funnel. If you put it anywhere else, you completely disrupt the downward momentum you've been so carefully building.
And crucially, this thesis can't just be a topic statement. It has to be comprehensive, maybe a little controversial, and definitely predictive. How do we make sure the thesis acts as a true roadmap, fulfilling that predictive function?
It needs to state not just your finding, but the key mechanisms you use to achieve that finding. It's a promise. If you read the thesis, you should instantly know the argument of every major section of the body of the paper.
So let's revisit that comprehensive example.
Regular physical exercise reduces stress by improving mood, lowering anxiety, and boosting energy levels.
See, the power there isn't just in the declaration exercise reduces stress, but in the specific segmented roadmap it provides. Improving mood is body section 1, lowering anxiety is body section 2, and boosting energy levels, body section 3.
Exactly. It immediately moves the thesis from just a simple declaration to a complex, actionable argument.
And this is where we can talk about a really common pitfall, right? Scope creep in the thesis.
A huge pitfall. A weak writer might try to cram too many mechanisms into that one sentence, making the paper just impossible to manage. Or, or they might present a thesis that's simply a restatement of common knowledge.
Which makes it non-controversial.
And not worth arguing. An effective thesis must be something that requires evidence and analysis to prove. It has to compel the reader to keep reading.
So if Maya's early attempts at a thesis just said, bilingual education is good for students, that's weak. It's obvious. It's not controversial.
Right. It's a starting point, not an argument.
But if she says, bilingual education fundamentally restructures cognitive processing by enhancing inhibitory control, leading to demonstrably better performance in complex problem solving, now that's a strong, predictive, and analytical thesis.
Absolutely. The strong thesis acts as the definitive end of the general conversation and the clear beginning of your specific proprietary argument. That smooth transition from broad general info in the hook through the context down to the focused argument in the thesis, that is the defining structural success of the introduction.
So if Maya was stuck before, it was probably because she was trying to start with Job for the thesis, without first rhetorically justifying the need for the paper with jobs 1, 2, and 3.
That's almost always the problem.
It sounds like the introduction is less about what you know and more about strategic communication. You're telling the reader how to read your paper before they even start. If you feel stuck, just go back to the sequence: hook, context, question, thesis.
Nail those 4 jobs in that order, and the structure of the entire argument is established.
Okay, so once the introduction has set that argument in stone, we move into the analytical engine.
The body paragraphs. This is the intellectual grind, the systematic process of proving your thesis point by point. The body is where your notes become evidence, and that evidence becomes sustained analysis.
And this is where so many writers, like the Maya we described, they falter. They treat the body paragraphs as vessels for quotes.
Just buckets.
Right, just buckets, not as engines for analysis. Our sources really emphasize that the body paragraphs aren't just supporting sections. They are discrete, complete arguments in themselves. And because of that, they require a mandatory, rigorous internal structure.
The standard, effective academic paragraph has to execute 4 specific steps. We're moving beyond the basic idea of claim, evidence, commentary, and focusing on the function of each step to guarantee critical depth.
Okay, let's detail that analytical structure. First, the paragraph must begin with the topic sentence.
Always.
Second, it has to introduce the evidence from sources. Third, and this is the most critical part, it requires comprehensive explanation and analysis. And fourth, it has to conclude with an explicit connection back to the thesis.
Let's walk through this using the exercise and stress theme we established earlier. I think showing the flow in action is really the only way to internalize this structure.
Part 1. The topic sentence. You said this is the most strategically important sentence in the paragraph. Why?
Because it controls the paragraph's scope. It must clearly announce which singular, discrete point of the overall thesis this paragraph, and only this paragraph, intends to prove.
So if our thesis declared 3 mechanisms: improved mood, lowered anxiety, and boosted energy,
then the first body paragraph must focus entirely on improved mood. So the topic sentence functions as a claim. For example, exercise significantly improves mood among university students, serving as a rapid, accessible coping mechanism against academic pressure.
I see. So it doesn't state a fact. It states an argumentative claim.
Exactly. The topic sentence should never be a piece of evidence or a statistic or a quote from someone else. It is the writer's proprietary claim that requires support from the evidence that immediately follows. It dictates the entire intellectual direction for the next, say, 150 words.
Okay, so once that proprietary claim is established, we move to part 2, evidence. This is where you strategically integrate your research.
And strategically is the key word there. We're not talking about simply dumping a block quote here. We're talking about the seamless, integrated deployment of facts, data, and expert opinion to support the specific claim made in the topic sentence.
How does the integration of evidence change based on the source material? I mean, the term sources is pretty generic, but the approach to empirical data is very different from, say, theoretical data.
That is a critical distinction, and it really elevates the discussion. If you're dealing with empirical research, like our stress study, you'd integrate quantitative findings. For example, several double-blind studies found that after 30 minutes of moderate physical activity, participants experienced a measurable 20% increase in circulating endorphin levels, peaking 15 minutes post-exercise.
Okay, so the evidence is concrete, it's statistical.
Right, but if we look at Maya's work on bilingual education, she might be integrating qualitative evidence, a theoretical model, or an interpretive statement from a recognized cognitive scientist.
So her evidence would be a quote.
A strategic quote, or a summary that defines a concept necessary for her claim. For Maya, the evidence might be citing a specific definition. Cognitive flexibility, defined by Bialystok as the ability to rapidly shift attention between two competing rule sets, appears highly correlated with language mastery. In both cases, the evidence must directly relate to the topic sentence.
Now we get to the core intellectual challenge for the academic writer, and the place where Maya, in her rough drafts, often failed. Part 3, explanation and analysis.
Just so what step?
Exactly. Why is it not enough to just present the evidence and move on?
It's insufficient because raw evidence never, ever speaks for itself in an academic context. You are not a news reporter, you are an analyst. You have to interpret the evidence for the reader and explicitly show how it supports your specific topic sentence and, more broadly, your thesis. This step requires critical interpretation, often called meta-commentary.
Meta-commentary. I like that term. It's like you're writing about your own writing, explaining the significance of the data you just presented.
That's a great way to put it.
So let's take the endorphin data. What does weak analysis look like versus strong, sophisticated analysis?
Weak analysis just repeats the evidence in different words. It would say something like, this shows that endorphins go up when you exercise, which makes students feel good. That's just reporting.
It's descriptive, not analytical.
Right. Strong analysis, or meta-commentary, interprets the implications of the finding relative to the paragraph's claim. It digs deeper.
Give us the strong version then. How do we interpret that endorphin spike in the context of academic stress?
The strong interpretation focuses on the mechanism and the result. Something like this. This hormonal change is significant because elevated endorphins directly activate the brain's reward centers, competing with and often overriding the physiological manifestation of stress hormones like cortisol.
So you're explaining how it works.
Exactly, and then you connect it. Therefore, this finding interprets exercise not merely as a distraction, but as a neurochemical intervention that actively resets the emotional baseline, facilitating greater emotional stability in students facing academic pressure.
That is the critical link. You are explaining the causal mechanism. You're not just saying that two things are related, you're explaining the mechanics of the relationship. This is the moment critical thinking moves from implied to explicit.
And it's what turns a descriptive paper into a persuasive analytical one.
So for Maya's work, weak analysis would just state that the expert found a correlation between bilingualism and cognitive flexibility.
Yep. Strong analysis would connect that finding directly to her central argument. The enhancement of inhibitory control, as cited by Bialystok, is critical because it explains how bilingual students become adept at filtering irrelevant academic information and maintaining focus on complex, multi-step tasks, thereby directly supporting the hypothesis that early language exposure leads to superior executive functioning skills.
You are essentially building a microscopic bridge between the data point and your argument. You can never assume the evidence performs the argument for you.
You must always perform the argument over the evidence.
Love that. And this leads us to the final necessary step. Part 4, the connection to the thesis. After all that intense labor of claim, evidence, and analysis, you have to explicitly link the paragraph's finding back to the overarching argument.
You do?
Why is this explicit connection so necessary, though? Especially if the analysis just did all the work, doesn't it feel a little repetitive?
It feels repetitive only to the writer who already knows the structure. To the reader, it provides vital structural closure. It's the paragraph's final moment to confirm its mission was accomplished and that the paper is moving forward cohesively.
So what would our example's concluding sentence be?
It concludes, therefore, improved mood is established as the primary biochemically verifiable mechanism through which consistent physical exercise contributes to overall stress reduction among the university population.
So that final sentence confirms that the paragraph fulfilled the very first of the 3 promises made in the introduction. That flow idea, evidence, explanation, connection needs to be replicable across every single analytical paragraph.
And this structural commitment reinforces what we call the one idea, one paragraph rule. This rule isn't just about neatness, it's about intellectual focus.
If your thesis has 3 core segmented points, mood, anxiety, energy, then you must dedicate a corresponding distinct analytical section to each point.
In that exact sequence, whether it's one paragraph per point or a cluster of paragraphs, the focus must be singular.
This sounds like a tremendous relief for the learner battling information overload. It immediately modularizes the entire writing task. It forces you to categorize your notes.
It does.
If I have a great quote about endorphins, It belongs in the mood paragraph.
Hmm.
If I have a statistic about sleep cycles, that needs to go in the energy or anxiety section.
It creates a structural imperative. It prevents what you could call paragraph creep, where you start discussing the data on mood, and then halfway through, you start introducing anecdotal evidence about sleeping patterns. That just confuses the reader and weakens the focus of both claims.
Adhering to the blueprint ensures a clean, logical sequence that honors the contract you established in your introduction.
Exactly.
Now, even if every paragraph is a perfectly built intellectual module, the paper can still feel disjointed, right? The glue that prevents the paper from fracturing is the art of transitions.
Transitions are the directional signage on the intellectual highway. They are signals that indicate the relationship between the paragraph you just finished and the one you are about to start. They have to be fluid and logical, ensuring the piece feels like one cohesive narrative rather than, 3 or 4 separate essays stapled together.
We often teach additive transitions first. These are used when you're moving from one supporting point to another similar point.
Yes, additive transitions, words like furthermore, or phrases like in addition to improving mood, or another significant factor in stress reduction is these signal continuity and build argumentative momentum. They reinforce the idea that the preceding point was strong, and now you're adding the next layer of verifiable support.
But the truly sophisticated papers integrate complexity. That requires a different kind of transition, doesn't it? Good academic writing has to acknowledge limitations, counter-arguments, or opposing views.
We need concessive transitions for that.
Concessive transition.
They're vital for showing intellectual maturity. Phrases like, however, some researchers argue, or despite the clear evidence linking exercise to mood, one study found conflicting data regarding long-term effects. These transitions allow you to acknowledge existing friction or conflicting data or weaknesses in the evidence base without destabilizing your own primary argument.
It's a strategic move, then. You're signaling that you're aware of the full landscape. You include the potential weaknesses to demonstrate mastery, turning a counter-argument into a supportive element by anticipating reader objections.
The transition acts as a swift pivot, preparing the reader for a moment of intellectual friction before you guide them back to your main path.
And Maya would have needed this when discussing bilingual education. I know some older studies suggested cognitive overload when children switched between languages.
That's a perfect example. Instead of ignoring that, she could use a concessive transition. Something like, although initial research posited that code switching demonstrated cognitive confusion, subsequent studies have utilized advanced neural imaging techniques to show that this practice actually leverages pre-existing neuroplasticity.
A finding which fundamentally undermines the earlier model of cognitive deficit.
Masterful. The transition acknowledges the friction, and the analysis then pivots to show why your evidence supersedes that conflicting view.
So we've established the claims in the introduction, proved them rigorously in the body paragraphs, and linked them with strategic transitions. Now for the final structural movement.
Section 3, the conclusion. The conclusion is often the most underdeveloped part of the paper. It gets treated as an exhausted formality.
It's such a missed opportunity.
It is. The conclusion's goal is not a simple summary. It is the ultimate rhetorical triumph. It must demonstrate with authority that you successfully answered your research question and unequivocally proved your thesis.
It's the moment where you take the reader's hand and walk them back up that rhetorical funnel. You started broad, moved to specific analysis, and now you are expanding back out to broader significance.
And to achieve this definitive closure, the conclusion needs 3 powerful parts. Part 1, restate the thesis in new words.
In new words, that's key.
Part 2, summarize the main points, a concise recap of the body paragraphs. And Part 3, show the importance of your findings, the broader relevance, the so what on a grand scale.
Okay, let's focus on that distinction in Part 1. Why is avoiding repetition here more important than in any other section?
Because the conclusion is read with the full authority of the entire preceding argument. In the introduction, the thesis was a hypothesis, a set of claims you promised to prove.
Right, it was a promise.
In the conclusion, it has been transformed into a demonstrated outcome. You need to shift the language to reflect this new reality. Instead of saying, this paper will argue that exercise reduces stress, you say, this research conclusively demonstrates that exercise is a powerful agent for stress reduction. The language moves from predictive to declarative.
And then the summary of main points. This isn't a reanalysis. It needs to be swift and focused on the structural pillars you built.
Correct. This is where you remind the reader of the mechanisms you proved. You just quickly recap. The sustained evidence confirms the central role of improved mood, the reduction of symptomatic anxiety, and the resulting boost in energy levels. It's a high-altitude flyover of the landscape you just successfully traversed.
And part 3 is where the impact really lands, showing the importance of your findings. This is where you address the question, if this paper didn't exist, what would the world be missing? It takes the argument beyond the confines of the student stress model.
This is often referred to as discussing the implications of your research. What policy changes does your data suggest? How does your finding shift current academic theory? Our exercise study example provides concrete implications. The findings suggest that universities should integrate mandatory physical activity scheduling alongside traditional academic support services.
To manage student retention and mental health outcomes.
Exactly. You're translating your analytical findings into actionable recommendations or broader theoretical shifts. For Maya, the implication of her successful argument about executive functioning might be recommending fundamental changes to early childhood education curricula.
So the full conclusion example from our source material really demonstrates how these 3 parts merge together.
It does. It gives us a powerful closing statement that achieves that sense of definitive closure. This research conclusively shows that regular physical exercise plays an important, verifiable role in reducing student stress. By improving mood, lowering anxiety, and increasing energy, physical activity strengthens mental well-being and offers students a powerful, self-directed mechanism to manage the intense academic pressures of university life more effectively.
Okay, let's break that down. The first sentence is the declarative restatement. The next confirms the specific mechanisms, and the final phrase links those mechanisms to the broader relevance. Improve mental well-being and management of academic pressure. It's tight, clear, and authoritative.
And finally, for the advanced learner, we should discuss the strategic use of looking beyond the paper. This is where you can discuss gaps or suggest avenues for future research. It's a kind of intellectual courtesy to the next researcher.
And a final demonstration of your critical depth.
Right. If the paper proves A, B, and C, you might suggest that the next step is to explore D and E. But there's a strict caveat here. These suggestions must emerge logically from your findings. You can't just pivot to an entirely new field.
So if the research proved that aerobic exercise reduces stress,
then the gap might be suggesting a follow-up study to compare the efficacy of aerobic exercise versus, say, high-intensity resistance training. It uses the limits of your own scope to create intellectual momentum for the continuing conversation within the field. You provide closure while acknowledging that academic inquiry is infinite.
let's bring this back one last time to Maya. She was stuck, staring at a blank page, just burdened by her notes. But once she understood this 3-part structural framework, her anxiety about the blank page vanished. Why?
Because the structure dictates the composition. Her notes stopped being a pile of data and became categorized evidence, ready to be slotted into a predefined analytical structure. Her challenge was solved by the framework. The 4-job introduction set the scope for her work. The body provided that dedicated 4-part analysis for each claim she made, and the 3-part conclusion demonstrated the success of her argument and the implications for curriculum design.
So let's bring this deep dive to a close then. You now possess the strategic mastery of academic assembly. You know that the introduction is a rhetorical funnel designed to narrow focus onto a specific predictive thesis.
You know how to build effective body paragraphs using that vital 4-part structure topic, evidence, explanation, or meta-commentary, and that explicit connection back to the thesis, ensuring every single piece of data is rigorously analyzed.
And you can conclude your paper with strength and clarity, transforming a hypothetical argument into a declarative statement of proven fact and demonstrating the broader relevance and implications of your hard-won findings.
This structured, modular approach is your ultimate defense against information paralysis.
The blank page doesn't come from a lack of ideas. It comes from a lack of an organized intellectual machine. Now you have the blueprint for that machine, which forces your analysis into a clear, persuasive sequence.
And we focus entirely on assembly and structure today, which is, it's necessary to produce a good research paper, but structure is only half the battle. Structure provides the skeleton, but the true excellence lies in the articulation and refinement of the language and argument.
So as structure gets you to the finish line, what specific steps in the next critical stage of editing and revision are required to turn a good research paper into a truly excellent one? That's the strategic question we leave you to mull over. Until next time.